And it's fantastic to have such an international audience for this evening's presentation. So welcome, everybody. This evening, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Simon Dewan. He is a long-standing friend of what this group used to be when we met physically in London. Simon came from China to the UK to study in the 80s. And after receiving a PhD in material science from Cambridge University, he worked for many years in research and development, technology, commercialization, and management consultancy, both in the UK and in China. He now works for the UK Government Department for International Trade as sector specialist for advanced manufacturing sector trade relationship with China. And normally he goes to China quite a lot, but he is at the moment, I don't think, going so much, probably because of the situation of the pandemic there, but I don't know, he can say more about this. So he was also the past vice president of Chinese Parapsychological Association, and he is the founder of Metaconsciousness Labs, which researches post-materialism paradigm that unifies consciousness, mind, and matter. So this evening, Simon's topic is Platonic Computer, the universal machine that bridges the inverse explanatory gap in the philosophy of mind. So I'm hoping that he will explain to us in more detail what the inverse explanatory gap is, what metaconsciousness is, and then the core of his presentation, the Platonic Computer. So welcome, Simon, and over to you.
Thank you, Claudia, for your kind introduction. And it's really a privilege to be here again to share some thoughts with you. And thanks for everyone who's joining us this evening or this morning. So yeah, as Claudia said, I was trained as a material scientist. I used to spend all my PhD looking through the electron microscope and finding out the microstructure of matters, including metals and ceramics and polymer materials. So I'm supposed to be a materialist, but somehow I got involved in paranormal research and parapsychology. That actually changed my perspective into the world. I am now a committed idealist. So yeah, today's talk is really about how we can make the idealist worldview a coherent worldview. This is my third talk at SMN Consciousness Perspective Forum, actually. The previous two talks, the first talk at this forum was titled Digital Consciousness and Platonic Computation, Unification of Consciousness, Mind, and Matter by Metaconsciousness. It was based on the paper published on an American Philosophical Association journal with the same title. My second talk was titled Parallel Universes, Can We Model Them Theoretically and Explore Them Experimentally? So in this talk, I will focus on the inverse hard problem of consciousness and inverse explanatory gap. I'll review the simulation hypothesis and the Metaconsciousness model. I will then propose a concept of a Platonic computer as the bridge for the inverse explanatory gap. Finally, I will discuss whether it is a robust bridge. Before we get our teeth onto the inverse hard problem of consciousness, let's start by reviewing the classical hard problem of consciousness. In philosophy of mind, the hard problem of consciousness was so named by David Chalmers in 1995. The hard problem of consciousness arises from making the position of materialism, which holds that material existence is fundamental and everything is physical. From this position, it is evident that consciousness is a derivative of the material brain. However, if the materialistic worldview is adopted, it becomes difficult to explain how neural activities in the brain give rise to the first-person subjective conscious experience, such as red rather than green, or the sound of a dog barking, the smell of a rose, taste of red wine, and above all, the external images we perceive in the world. There is an explanatory gap between our understanding, no matter how complete, of the neural correlates of a conscious experience and our first-person subjective conscious experience. So this is the classical explanatory gap. Having realized that the hard problem of consciousness is insolvable, the last few decades have seen an increasing number of consciousness researchers turning away from materialism and adopting alternative philosophical positions. This is from David Chalmers himself. He wrote a paper in 2019. He says, some recent strands in philosophical discussion of mind-body problem have recapitulated this progression. The rise of materialism in the 1950s and 1960s, the dualist response in the 1980s and 1990s, the festival of panpsychism in the 2000s, and some recent steering of idealism. So I think this is the description of his own journey, along with many of his fellow philosopher colleagues. In a recent book published this year, Chalmers coined a term, it from bit from consciousness, implying consciousness is the fundamental existence. I'll come back to this term later as it summarizes very well what I will discuss in this talk. So it is evident that philosophers are now moving in a direction towards idealism, which is encouraging. So let's have a look at the idealism. Idealism holds that consciousness is the fundamental nature of reality. That is, everything is mental. From this point of view, matter is the derivative of consciousness. However, if an idealistic worldview is adopted, then it becomes difficult to explain how consciousness gave rise to the apparently independent existence of the material world. This is encapsulated in the phrase, the inverse hard problem consciousness, that was coined by Max Welmers to highlight this issue. Yeah, Max is also one of the speakers of SMN community. One of the leading proponents of idealism is Bernardo Kastrup. It's worth mentioning that Kastrup has managed to publish many articles in Scientific American, indicating that idealism is getting increased attention in mainstream scientific community. He puts forward the argument universal consciousness is all there ultimately is, with everything else in nature being reducible to patterns of excitation of this consciousness. So, however, it is not clear what are the patterns of excitation of the universal consciousness, and there is no mechanism for how these patterns can be transformed into the phenomenal world we experience. Donald Hoffman, a cognitive psychologist who also actively promotes the consciousness is fundamental, we need a fundamental new foundation from which to construct a theory of objects. Here we explore the possibility that consciousness is that new foundation. In his book, The Case Against Reality, he was suggesting that for the perspective human, space-time is the desktop, and the physical objects are icons. So he was suggesting that objects we perceive in space and time are more like a virtual reality created by computation. Hoffman certainly isn't the first person to speculate that the physical reality may be a processing output of computation. As early as 1969, Konrad Rose, a German computer scientist, suggested that the entire universe is being computed on a computer. John Wheeler, a renowned physicist, in early 1990, proposed a now famous phrase, "it from bit." All things physical are information theoretic in origin. Edward Fredkin is another American computer scientist. He further speculated that there is this place, other, that hosts the engine that runs the physics. In the last few decades, there has been many science fiction novels, movies, and TV series based on the idea that we are living in a computer-generated reality. These movies, particularly The Matrix, popularized the idea to a very large audience. At the same time, more and more professional philosophers and scientists are taking the idea seriously and have been writing books, magazines, articles, and getting involved in debating if we are living in a computer simulation. Let's now watch a short video clip to get a flavor of this debate and discussion.
What is life for Elon Musk?
As I get older, I find that question to be confusing or troubling. I think particularly when you see the advancement of something like video games. You know, like say 40 years ago, the most advanced video game would be like Pong, where you had like two rectangles and a dot. But now you can see a video game that's photorealistic and millions of people playing simultaneously. And you see where things are going with virtual reality. Then eventually those games will be indistinguishable from reality. They'll be so realistic, you will not be able to tell the difference between that game and the reality as we know it. How do we know that that didn't happen in the past and that we're not in one of those games ourselves?
Tonight's topic is the universe a computer simulation? We've got some highly thoughtful, talented, respected people to weigh in on this.
The more I learned about later on as a physicist, the more struck I was that when you get deep down under the hood about how nature works, how can I be sure that this mathematical reality isn't actually some kind of game or simulation?
In my research, I had found this very strange thing, error correcting codes. Error correcting codes are what make browsers work. So why were they in the equations that I was studying about quarks and leptons and supersymmetry? And that's what brought me to this very stark realization that I could no longer say that people like Max were crazy. So you're saying as you dig deeper, you find computer code rich in the fabric of the cosmos. Computer code, strings of bits of ones and zeros.
The guy who really started forcing scientists to take this a bit more seriously and gave this idea a bit more scientific street cred, I think, is Nick Bostrom, my fellow Swede, and Nick Bostrom.
We are almost certainly living in a simulation. It's a little bit complex, but it's really not more complex than most educated people could probably get their heads around if they thought about it for half an hour, kind of, if they actually tried.
You know, there's this interesting argument by your colleague at Oxford, Nick Bostrom. He argues that the notion of a simulated universe, what do you think about that? I can't see how you could refute it. I mean, I can't see how you would actually be sure that we're not.
Yeah, as we can see, these experts are favoring the simulation argument. But at the same time, there are many others who disagree. There are actually live debates on the internet on this topic. If you search the term simulation hypothesis, you get over 1.2 billion search results. It's an incredible number. So many people are talking about this and are debating about this point. Most debates focus on if we are living in a computer simulation, or what are the chances that we live in a simulation. I actually think those kind of debate is pretty pointless. The reason being that the true nature of the universe, or the universe in itself, according to Immanuel Kant, is unknowable. Okay? If it's unknowable, whatever we think the universe is not true. If an elephant is unknowable to blind people, what they understand about elephant can only be metaphors like a fan, a pillar, a tube, etc. Therefore, arguing whether the universe is a computer simulation is like arguing among the blind if an elephant is a fan or a pillar or a tube. Of course, the elephant is not a fan or a pillar. And of course, the universe is not a computer simulation. Is the universe a computer simulation is thus a pointless question to ask. The worthwhile question to ask is, can we model the universe as a computer simulation? These are two very different questions. I hope you can see the difference. Yeah. By asking the right question, we get on the track to do science instead of just speculating. Okay, if we can build models, we do science. In science, we rely heavily on metaphors to build models of the universe. The metaphors are picked from concepts we already familiar with. These concepts evolve through time too. For example, in mechanical era, we had conceptual metaphors such as clocks and watches. So we modeled the macro universe as a clock-like machine. When human society was electrified, we had electricity as a conceptual metaphor. So we modeled the micro-universe as electrically charged particles. So we have electron, which is negatively charged, and the proton, which is positively charged. Okay, so we use those kind of metaphors to build models. Now we are in the information age. We have now conceptual metaphors available to us, which are new to us. The new conceptual tools available to us nowadays, including computer, information processing, big data, simulation, virtual reality, artificial intelligence. With these new conceptual tools, we can build new model of the universe. To build a new model of the universe based on metaphors like computer simulation, we need to address a number of key questions. These questions include, where is the computer? Where does it come from? What is it made of? How is it built? What are its properties? And who or what is the programmer? With answer to those questions, we are hopeful to build a model. To address the first question, where is the computer? will seek insights from arguably the greatest philosopher of all times. Whitehead once commented, "The safest general characterization of the European philosophical tradition is that it consists of a series of footnotes to Plato." Plato is certainly no ordinary philosopher. I have little doubt that Plato is an enlightened being. Therefore, his insights ought to be taken seriously, particularly the insights into the ideal realm of forms. According to Plato, physical existence is a shadow or poor imitation of the ideal realm of existence. Abstract entities exist in the realm of forms, which operate as the fundamental reality. Material objects in the physical reality resemble their perfect abstract forms to varying degrees. For example, in the realm of forms, there is an ideal dog form and abstract dogness as a universal. Dogs in the material reality of all shapes and sizes are only shadows of this ideal dog form. So the ideal dog form is like an archetype or template. And the material dogs are actually shadows of this ideal dog form. Based on such a principle, it is postulated that the everyday material computer made of silicon is only a shadow or a poor imitation of the perfect abstract metaphysical computer that exists in the realm of forms. We call this abstract metaphysical computer a Platonic computer. The physical computer resembles the way Platonic computer computes. So both computers carry out computation. Let's remind ourselves what is computation. In essence, computation is very simple. To compute is to answer a binary question. So which question?
To be or not to be, that is the question.
So computation is to determine a choice of binary, to be or not to be, yes or no, on or off, 0 or 1, according to a set of rules. Yeah, so that's computation. In physical computer, the binary is on-off switch made of silicon material. So we have a computer made of silicon, we have input, which is binary, we have output, which is also binary. Yeah, operated on an on-off switch. In Platonic computer, the binary switch is a metaphysical one, made of metaconsciousness. Manifested metaconsciousness is on, and unmanifested metaconsciousness as off. So we have a switch also made of a metaconsciousness. I'll come back to the definition of metaconsciousness in a minute. Now, with the switch made of binary states of metaconsciousness, we can construct an operating metaphysical computer. Using the metaphysical binary, we can construct 3 faculties. A database consists of metadata, which is specific configurations of manifested metaconsciousness and unmanifested metaconsciousness. And we can also construct a program pack, which is a sequence of codes in binary opposites. And finally, a processor made of on-off switches, which is also binary states. So with these 3 faculties, we can build the Platonic computer. What is metaconsciousness? The nature of metaconsciousness is non-dual, meaning there is no subject-object separation. Therefore, metaconsciousness is not an object to be understood or to be described. Because non-dual, there's no separation between subject and object. When you try to understand something, you need to separate yourself. Yeah, you have an object, you have a subject to try to understand the object. But if it's non-dual, there's no separation. So we cannot see what metaconsciousness is. We can only see what it is not. We often describe it negatively using terms such as timeless, dimensionless, formless, contentless, infinite, no thing, which is nothing. Yeah, no changing, non-destructive. Yeah. However, as we want to use metaconsciousness as the starting point to build our model, we need to define it somehow. So we gave metaconsciousness a working definition. The metaconsciousness is defined as the potential power to conceive, which is to create, and to perceive, which is to experience what's been created, and to be self-aware, which is the inherent subjectivity. So metaconsciousness is the potential power and infinite potentiality. So with this power to conceive, to perceive, and to be self-aware. The construction of Platonic computer consists of 3 steps. Number 1, metaconsciousness manifests itself into existence from nothing to something, from 0 to 1. Number 2, binary states are constructed and the metaphysical switch is constructed with unmanifested metaconsciousness and manifested metaconsciousness. Number 3, structured binary states are configured into 3 faculties to form an operating metacomputation system. Once we have this computation system, space and its contents are processing output of metacomputation system. So basically, metaconsciousness digitalizes itself to form a computer, so it becomes computable. The processing output of the computation is time, space, and the contents within the space, that is the phenomena universe. Therefore, Platonic computer serves as a bridge to connect universal consciousness and the phenomenal universe. It from bit from consciousness, as David Chalmers concisely put it. Now we have built the bridge. Let's have a look how robust is this bridge. We'll analyze the bridge in terms of its parsimony and internal consistency, its explanatory power, its testability, and its applications. The graphs summarize the model very well. So we started with metaconsciousness because we adopted a monolith philosophical stance. It's sufficiently parsimonious. Yeah. Also because we adopted the binary, which is the simplest structure of all structures. So it has its simplicity. Yeah. And we'll see it's also going to be very consistent. One might say that it's absolutely abstract or even imaginary computer. And how do we work with it? Yeah, how do we do any analysis to it? Well, it is true that we cannot access Platonic computer by seeing or touching it. However, we have access to its shadow, the physical computer. By manipulating the physical computer, we can learn a great deal about the Platonic computer. So by programming a physical computer and generating virtual reality, we can simulate how Platonic computer generates physical reality. Of course, the shadow is not the real thing. We can simulate a hurricane on the computer screen, but we wouldn't get wet or blown away. The hurricane on the computer screen is only a poor imitation of the physical hurricane in space. Nevertheless, a physical computer can simulate the dynamic changes of the weather so that the weather forecast can be made with a reasonable level of consistency. We'll see that Metacomputing's model offers a new perspective to many fundamental concepts so that they become easy to understand within the new theoretical framework. For example, what is time? Time was never defined in physics. In physics, the time is just a parameter, is a t. In physics equations, the past and present and the future is the same t. And there's no special feelings to the t even in the present. The past and the future is also symmetrical, which is not actually what we experience time is. We experience time is very different. The past and the future is very different. It's not symmetrical. And the present moment is very special. And in this framework, we define time as simply the internal clock of Platonic computer, operated by alternating the binary states. The past is processed metadata. Future is metadata yet to be processed. The present is the metadata which is being processed. So the past and future and present are very different. What is 3D space? Well, 3D space is a processing output of Platonic computation. So space is not given. Without computation, 3D space doesn't even exist. In our model, space functions as a 3D display made of pixels. Once we have a 3D display, we can then display infinite amount of diverse contents, such as shapes and forms and the material objects, i.e. all the contents of the universe. So the contents of the space are also processing output of Platonic computation. By building a new model of the universe, we managed to make a paradigm shift from traditional science to a new science on several grounds. Ontologically, we shift from matter is primary to consciousness is primary. Methodology-wise, we shift from reductionism to holism. We also have a new set of language tools to deploy. Mathematics used to be the sole language of traditional science. So now, in addition to mathematical equations, we also have algorithms as a working language of new science. With this new paradigm, we will have new perspective. From a new perspective, we'll have new understanding of the universe. We'll be able to explain many phenomena we couldn't explain before. So what are matters? In a new scientific framework, matters are stable data structures programmed to have a physical, chemical, or biological properties. For instance, these pool balls are programmed to behave as though they are solid balls. The solidity is determined and achieved by programming. So those balls are basically images, yeah, but images can be programmed to behave as though they have solidity. Laws of nature expressed by physics are approximation of program subroutine in Platonic computer. An apple is programmed to fall at an acceleration of 9.8 meters per second square. In physics, we still cannot explain how magnetism works. In our model, magnets are programmed to repel or attract to each other according to their polarity. So here we explain it with programming. We postulate that in Metacomputing's database, there is a subset of data which has highly stable data structure and robust programs to govern those data structures. So it's a subset of data which are highly stable. This subset of data structure thus appear at a phenomenological level as obeying the laws of physics. Therefore, physics is only a special case of metacomputing. So in the database, you have all kinds of data. A part of the subset of the data obeys physics. So physics is basically a special case in this model. What is entanglement? In Metacomputing's model, the two particles are basically two outputs in 3D space from running the same program. So it's like two dots on the computer screen. They entangle by programming. Platonic computation not only outputs physical reality, it is also responsible for producing non-physical realities in parallel universes, such as what we experience in dreaming states, in meditation state, in psychedelic state, and in near-death state. This topic was the focus of my last talk at this forum. The recording is still available online if you are interested in more details. A robust model of reality should not only have explanatory power, it is also expected to make testable predictions. Here we discuss a few predictions or inferences Metacomputing's model is able to make. Prediction number 1. If the physical universe is a processing output of computation, space and time will have to be discrete instead of continuous. Computation is inherently discrete and cannot handle continuous time and continuous space. We can use Zeno's paradox as a thought experiment to prove this is the case. If space and time are continuous, then Achilles will never have his last step. Without the last step, he will never reach the final destination. The fact Achilles does reach the destination is a proof that there is a last step. The last step is of the size of the pixel in space. Prediction number 2. Real cause of change is programming instead of other physical objects. Okay. Programming causes changes. Therefore, change can happen without a physical cause. This happens at astronomical scale in the case of a movement of the sun through space, and at the micro scale, the fluctuation of the quantum field. In both cases, there is no apparent physical cause for those dynamic movements. There is no need for physical cause. Programming does the job. Prediction number 2 has many subsidiary predictions. For example, we call this P2.1, that is, objects have no causal power. The movement of the blue ball is not caused by the white ball. The real cause of the blue ball's movement is the underlying program. The white ball simply triggers the program. We call this subsidiary prediction P2.1.1. If objects have no causal power, then neurons, which are objects themselves, do not cause any of our behavior or conscious experiences. This prediction can be tested by a parapsychological experiment, such as out-of-body experience and near-death experience. Prediction number 3 is information is stored in a database of Platonic computer and therefore is non-local in space. As we mentioned before, 3D space is a display like a computer screen. Information is not stored in a screen. It is stored in a memory card. And this prediction can be tested by EXP experiment, extra-sensor perception, which including telepathy, that is mind reading, clairvoyance, which is perception beyond senses, and precognition, knowing the future. Again, those are very classical parapsychological experiments. Prediction number 4. As we discussed before, physics are program subroutines in Platonic computer. If program is altered, physics will be altered. So physics can be locally and temporarily altered or suspended. We can test this prediction by carrying out PK experiments, psychokinesis, the mind of matter. I want to make a few points on simulation hypothesis and the parapsychology. As we have seen, the simulation hypothesis is heavily dependent upon parapsychology research and experimentation to verify or falsify its many predictions. Of course, many of the suggested parapsychological experiments have already been done in the past for over 100 years. However, they have been largely ignored or rejected by mainstream scientific community. Now, if they are part of an experimental program to verify or falsify a new theory, these experiments and experimental results will become more meaningful and impactful to mainstream scientific community. It is hoped that further development of simulation hypothesis and its predictions will engage more mainstream scientists into testing programs involving parapsychological experiments. Being an important part of verification program for new scientific theory, parapsychology will become an advanced and respected new science discipline. So I think it's going to be good news for parapsychology. The simulation hypothesis has been running in a circle. Parapsychology hasn't gone very far either. Okay, it's been over 100 years. It hasn't got much acceptance in mainstream scientific community. But if both can work as a team and to support each other, together they will progress a lot quicker and much further. An important factor to determine if a model is accepted or not is whether it is useful. Heliocentric model was accepted not because Galileo proved that the model was correct. At the time, none of Galileo's observation proved the Earth was moving around the sun. His model was accepted because it is more user-friendly. It's a lot easier to use to predict all the movement of the planets. So usefulness is very important for a model to get acceptance. There are many potential applications of metacomputing's model, so including metaverse and AI, including personal development. We are working with different experts in different fields to make some useful applications of this model. Here we highlight two examples. For example, in healing and healthcare, we are working with professionals to treat medical conditions, particularly those which cannot be treated effectively by mainstream medical means, such as phantom pain and autism. Okay, in principle, everything is programming. So if we can work on the programming level, everything can be changed. Medical condition is also an output of a Platonic computation, according to this model. So we don't work on the brain anymore because we understand the brain does not cause those conditions. We go into the next level, go on to the programming level to work to reprogramming certain behaviors. Let me summarize this talk by getting back to the questions we raised before. Yeah, those are the questions we mentioned in the beginning. And in this talk, we only managed to get through to the first 4 questions. We'll have to leave the last 2 questions to another time. So the first question, where is the computer? The answer is Platonic computer is in the realm of forms and is beyond phenomenal space, i.e., it is non-local. Where does it come from? The Platonic computer is made from metaconsciousness. What is it made of? The Platonic computer is made of manifested metaconsciousness and unmanifested metaconsciousness. How is it built? The metacomputation system is built by configuring a metaphysical binary into 3 faculties: metaprocessor, metadata, and metaprogram. The answers to those questions is summarized in this diagram we have seen before. As we can see, we start with metaconsciousness and we end up with the phenomenal physical universe. Now you have it, the bridge is built. Thank you for your attention.